Oh, there's Elaine and Barry. John Hilmer.
Can you hear us now?
You can. You can.
Oh, things are improving.
We'll mute everybody while John is talking.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to go back to voting rights.
If my mother was still alive, she'd say, "Oh, that's not wise. Not to mute him. Mute him." There's Joel. Winnie.
That your party is going to lose seats and possibly lose.
It's just 12 on the button, so we've got 14 people so far. Well, 14 units, so it'd be more people. Some of you, when I'm speaking, you may think that there's a toilet flushing somewhere in the house. It's not. It's something to do with my laptop. My son has told me that the wireless adapter isn't strong enough, and so you get this, and it sounds like, I was talking to Kevin about a month ago, and he said that Julie had said, "That sounds like a toilet flushing." It's not, it's just my laptop.
I thought it was your stomach.
Yeah, yeah. Well, watching everybody eating, it's no, it could be that too. Joel looks very serious.
If anybody wants to just say something briefly, they can just press the space bar if they have a keyboard. Otherwise, you'll have to use the unmute button down in the corner, down in the bottom left there. But we'll try and keep everybody muted while John and Rob are talking.
Rob, I tried to find the BLTS yearbook, but I could only go back as far as 81, 82. Not that I was going to try to find your photo and hold it up when you were 18 years of age.
Well, believe it or not, they found a copy of the picture of our BL class and put it on the wall in my office here.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'll bet you they got that photo. Someone inherited Charlie Moore, who was a member of First Baptist Church for many years. And he was on the BL board. And I guess he used to collect some of the surplus yearbooks. And when he passed away, someone inherited them, and they had a Facebook message telling people they had these yearbooks. And boy, we had all these BL grads sending messages in. Do you have 80, 81? Do you have 76, 75?
Right.
And this person had the majority of requests, so he must have had quite a collection.
Yeah, yeah.
So we'll wait maybe one more minute.
Nobody else is coming in that I can see right now, John.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. It's greatly appreciated that you have come online, and we're very appreciative of Rob Ogilvie, our Executive Minister of Canadian Baptist Western Canada, accepted our invitation to speak. And I thank Rob for taking the time out of what I know is a very busy schedule, but he does have time to hold grandchildren. I saw a Facebook picture this morning at 8:27. Was that today or yesterday?
That was on the weekend, actually.
That was on the weekend.
Yes, yeah.
And the baby looked much better than Dave did, or Rob did.
Yes, yeah.
Rob is the brother of our previous senior pastor, David Ogilvie. And but we appreciate the fact that Rob is with us. Just a few announcements. I know you're aware that this coming Sunday is Palm Sunday, and if you're planning on tuning in, I hope you'll tune in at 10:45. There's some very special archival music that you will hear, and then you will also hear Mark Anderson play just before the service proper starts. And then the Sunday evening is our Easter Alleluia concert. And yes, we are putting on a concert, even though we're in the time of COVID. There is no audience, no congregation. The only participants will be those who, what we refer to as live presentations, live gift of music. And the rest of the program, as I have weaved in or woven in archival music dating back to 1986 when I started up to the present time. So you will hear the Sanctuary Choir, you'll hear Exaltation, you'll hear His Kids, you will hear Rob Nelson sing a solo, the Fuller Brass will be on. Live performances will come from Jubilation Ringers, Karen Martin, Krista Walsh, Mark Anderson, Narrow Gate, which comprised of Kevin Rich, who is our Zoom host, and I thank Kevin for being our host, Jack Saylor, and Grant Hoffman, who is the guest guitarist for the group. And then during Holy Week, of course, there's Maundy, Thursday service, and if I remember correctly yesterday, as Joel eats there, that the service is at 7:30 instead of 7. And that's because we required a pianist, and Karen Martin is going to be the pianist, but she works till 7, and then we'll be there at 7:30. And then the Good Friday service is online, and you can go to West Hill Park Baptist Church's website, and you will be able to join the service. I have been invited to sing, and I will be there in person to sing. Keep in mind some of our church members in prayer. Carol Oxegren, she has had or is going to have an operation. Joel, has she had it, or is she has had surgery? Keep her in your prayers. Lois Schaff is recovering at Pioneer Village. I was talking to her the other day. They won't release her until she had hip surgery, so she's learning to walk correctly. Barry Lyons is undergoing treatment. Mervyn Carroll Hepting, and keep Norm Latham in your prayers as well. I'm sure there are others. Those are people that came to mind this morning, and they would certainly appreciate your prayers. And a person that we often have prayed for, but I have not been able to visit since the pandemic, is Susan Quinn. I have visited her for, I think, about 32 years, but have not been able to get into William Booth to visit or to phone. But it's her birthday today, and at the end of the month, if I remember correctly, it's her wedding anniversary. Daryl passed away a number of years ago, but Susan would certainly appreciate your prayers as well. Short devotion today. We're all living at a time where we're very aware of the increased mental illness, the increase in addiction. Many are trying to cope with the frustration of being isolated, not being able to be with family and friends. And I just want to share a devotion with you. Each of us at one time or another has experienced a real sense of defeat or failure. Right now, you can certainly recall, or you can just focus on what you're experiencing now in the way of isolation, defeat, failure. Recall how you felt at that time, or reflect on where you're at today. After your reflection, God knows we do not enjoy experiencing defeat or frustration or isolation or a sense of failure. God wants his people to be victorious. He wants them to be winners. And in Psalm 30, verse 11 and 12, thou hast turned my laments into dancing. Thou hast stripped off my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, that my spirit may sing psalms to thee forever, O Lord, my God. You and I, we can give thanks to God, however, for the times in which we have experienced defeat, when our depressed attitudes have almost overwhelmed us, and we found ourselves wondering how anything good could ever come from such a difficult situation, from our isolation, from our frustration. We have seen God do wonderful things, though, in those challenging times. When we realized our lack of total reliance on him and asked him to restore our joy for the purpose of displaying his glory, God did just that. He reached out and he clothed us with joy. He caused us once again to sing not with our lips only, but with our spirits. And so, a short little prayer. May the Lord help us never to forget we are singing to him as a form of confessing our total faith and reliance in him. Each of us has a song in our heart that we can sing. Then our joyful spirits may sing to him forever. All of these things we ask in thy very precious name. We thank you for this day. We thank you for this opportunity to gather together. We thank you for Rob and his ministry. We thank you for his family. And we look forward to him sharing with us. These things we ask in thy very precious name. Amen. Well, it really is a joy to have a former student who was a model student, angelic, really, almost reaching perfection. And I happened to find in my possession, now this is a cassette. It's not to reflect that Rob is old. To qualify that, because I remember when the vinyl albums came out, so I'm much older than Rob. But this was his BLTS cassette. And I thought it might be nice if we just had a Thursday flashback and we listened to Rob sing in his BLTS choir.
Oh no.
With the voice of singing, declaring this let me heard. Hallelujah. Declaring this and let declaring this and let it be heard. Hallelujah. Was written unto the ends of the earth. The Lord hath delivered
Rob was the organist. No, the organist was Madge Clark, and that was 1982, 1983. And I just happened to have that recording on my laptop, and I thought it would be a great Thursday flashback. As I said, we're very grateful to have Rob with us. Rob thinks that he has many claims to fame, but really the only claim to fame that he has, it's not that he comes from a wonderful family. He does. It's not that he's a BLTS grad, because he is. It's not because he is a former McDonald's employee. He was. Not because he was a pastor in the Saskatchewan area in Weyburn. He was a BC pastor. He is now the executive minister, or our Baptist Pope of the West, Canadian Baptists of Western Canada. His sole claim to fame is that he is married to Bonnie Risto. And you're welcome, Bonnie, if you're tuning in. Bonnie is Rob's wife, and both are dear and treasured friends. And we welcome you to Cheever's Luncheon, Rob, and we look forward to you sharing with us.
Wow, thanks, John. That's an amazing introduction. I don't even know who that group is that was singing, though. Are you sure that was our group? Because that sounded a little bit too good, I think, for how we were. But maybe it was at the very end of the year we made that recording. Must have been. Yeah, it was almost 40 years ago now. It's hard to believe, but it was good to be able to be a BLTS student. And that's where I first met John, when he was serving there. And so it was great to be there. But it's nice to be here with you today as well. And there's some familiar faces to me here in this virtual crowd. Joel, nice to see you. Thank you for your ministry at First Baptist. And I sent a note to Joel in the chat. I said, I don't think he's not 55 plus, though. I don't think so. I'm not sure that it's really legal that he's here, but getting there, eh? Yeah. And Annabel, we've been glad to have you on our ordination council, and it's been good to be able to connect with you. I've appreciated that very much. Ron and Marilyn Phillips, I don't know if I should say it this way, but Ron in many ways can be blamed for myself and all of my mess ups. Ron, the first church that I pastored, I'll tell you a little bit more about how we got to there in a few minutes, was in Weyburn, Saskatchewan. And Ron was my mentor. And it was a great privilege for me to have Ron as a mentor in those early years. As a young pastor, first church, you really don't know a thing. And to have someone who is much more seasoned and willing to give of himself, and we would meet on a regular basis. And I was grateful for that, and thankful to Marilyn and Ron both for their friendship, to Bonnie and I at that time and throughout the years. So it's we're grateful, and it's good to be able to be with you all. Appreciate it very much. Excuse me, you'll hear me cough every once in a while. I want to just stop the rumors now. I don't have COVID, but I have a cough. Believe it or not, there's still a few of those other illnesses that are out there. But so I'll try to not to cough too much, but thankfully you won't be affected with the setup that we're all in today. I was born and raised in Southern Ontario. I thought, as John talked about what I could talk about, I thought I'd tell you a bit about my story, in particular my story as to how I came into pastoral ministry. And but quick backstory: I was born and raised in Southern Ontario. As John said, I do have an older brother named Dave, and he was pastor at First Baptist Regina there way back. I'm thinking now about 95, if I remember correctly. I think it was the same week that my family and I left Weyburn, or no, it was 2000. It was 2000. The same week that my family and I left Weyburn, he and his family moved to Regina. So we're very close that way. But I was born and raised in Southern Ontario into a Christian family. Our dad was a pastor for the second half of his life. The first half of his life, he was involved in business, in a variety of different businesses. And but it was also that calling out to BLTS that drew me after finishing high school. When I finished high school, I worked for a year in a factory where I was a forklift operator. So that was kind of fun. And a good learning experience before coming out to BLTS in Calgary in 1982, 83, as John said. And that is where I met the woman who became my wife, Bonnie. She's not on here, John, so she didn't catch that personal intro, but I'll be sure to tell her and let her know about that. But we met at BLTS and she stole my heart, and I've been basically in the West ever since. We did do a short ministry stint on behalf of BLTS. A group of us went back to Ontario and for 6 weeks did a singing and puppetry and testimonies and such around Ontario and Quebec in support of the Canadian Baptists of Ontario and Quebec at that time as well. But then I came back out and I've been in the West ever since. And it was when I came to Calgary, I began an illustrious career with McDonald's restaurants, as John mentioned. I ended up working for McDonald's for 4.5 years. Now, some of you might feel that that's a life sentence, but you know, it was a very good 4.5 years. I started as what they call the manager trainee, and I worked my way up to running my own restaurant for the last 2 years that I was there. And recently, my wife Bonnie and I moved back to Calgary, and it's been interesting driving around going, that I used to work there, and remembering all these places from our Calgary days. But that 4.5 years at McDonald's, on the one hand, I can say rather flippantly, I was working for McDonald's. But on the other hand, that 4.5 years became a very significant time of my life, in particular in preparation for the ministry that God ended up having for me. And two of the key things that I think that I learned at McDonald's, or at least two, was that you had to deal with staff and you had to deal with customers, the public. And they were very important lessons to learn early on, as well as, you know, at what temperature to cook your hamburger and all of those other very important things that came along. But the time at McDonald's was actually very important training for me, and I was grateful for that. Learned a lot about running a $2.5 million a year business and everything else that went along with that. But after 4.5 years with McDonald's, I thought, well, the world's my oyster now. Obviously, I've got all this training and experience. I should be able to go out and do anything. And so I left McDonald's and I found another job that I lasted in for 2 months. It was with a company called Granada. Some of you might actually remember Granada. Granada had this very unique setup where they rented television sets to people. You don't hear that very much anymore, I don't think. But Granada used to rent televisions, and so I rented and sold TVs and stereos. I lasted for 2 months, and in that time, came to the realization I needed to get an education. Because at that point, I realized every time I switched from one role to another, I would probably start at the bottom again, and I'd have to restart each time. So I ended up enrolling in the University of Calgary, and my intent was to go into business. And linear algebra and me didn't get along all that well, and calculus and I didn't get along any better, really, I must admit. And so the business thing seemed to go sideways. And it's terrible when I tell this story, my wife always says to me, you have a terrible way of telling this story, because it sounds like you ended up settling for what you ended up doing. And so hopefully you don't feel that there's actually a point, the purpose to saying it this way, but business didn't work out. And so I decided I would become a teacher. I would go into the education faculty. And so I enrolled, or I went to enroll in the education faculty, and they said, oh, well, you need to have some experience in volunteering in school settings, and they gave me this list of things that you needed to do. And so over the next year, I volunteered and did those things while I was doing as many courses as I could. And at the end of that year, I went back to the education faculty. I said, okay, here I am. And they said, well, we've changed our admission requirements. And you don't need all of those types of things anymore. We're going strictly by grade point average. Now, I'm not the world's best student, but I'm not the world's worst student. And I had a B+ grade point average. I had a 3.3 grade point average. And that wasn't enough to get me into the education faculty. And I have to admit, I wasn't one who just embraced study. I didn't just love school for the sake of school. And so at that point, I said, what's the fastest possible degree I can get and get out and get out of university? And it turned out it would be a Bachelor of Arts degree in geography. And I was working towards, in education, I was starting to work towards being a social studies teacher with an emphasis in geography. And so my focus became getting a Bachelor of Arts in geography with no idea as to what I would do with that at the end of it, just knowing that I would at least have that undergrad degree, the bachelor's degree, which led to a real time of seeking and wrestling as I was approaching the end of that degree, because the question was, what am I going to do next? And to enter into a master's program didn't seem to be the thing in geography. And so as I was wrestling with that, I also began to really wrestle with what it meant to be called into pastoral ministry. People had told me all my life, or I'd been encouraged by people a lot, from BLTS, even before BLTS. I've been encouraged by people to consider pastoral ministry. And one of the things I often wrestled with was, what does call really mean? Because I'd heard people use this term all the time. They were called to pastoral ministry. And so my quest began by talking to people, talking to other pastors, talking to the principal of BLTS at the time, talking to my father, talking to my brother who had gone into pastoral ministry, and trying to gain some sort of an understanding of what a calling was, and spent a great deal of time in those conversations, wrestling and praying. And it was a Wednesday night in late May 1992, which seems rather specific, and it was one of those moments. I don't know the exact dates, but I know it was a Wednesday night in late May of 1992 when I said to Bonnie, we need to talk. And I said, I think that I'm supposed to go into pastoral ministry. And she said, I think you are too. Now, you have to know that that was a big thing at that point in time, because Bonnie had also wrestled a lot with me going into pastoral ministry, if that was something I would do. She'd always said she'd never marry a farmer or a minister. And so those were her requirements. And so what I find interesting as I look back is that none of these experiences from the past ever get wasted in God's world, because what he is doing is he's preparing us often in various ways for time. And I needed to be prepared throughout that undergrad degree, and Bonnie needed to be prepared as well in order to enter into the role of being a spouse of a pastor. Bonnie is a nurse and has her own career, and has nursed her entire life and has just retired in the last couple of months. So she's celebrating that milestone. So late Wednesday night, late May 1992, we both agree I'm supposed to go into pastoral ministry. That night we created a plan. We would both work for the next year. Bonnie was on maternity leave at that time with our first child. We were going to both work for a year, and then in that time we'd figure out what seminary we would go to and how that would all play out. We had a great plan. That was Wednesday night. On Sunday, we went to church. Church was Bonavista Baptist Church in Calgary. Some of you will be familiar with it. In the bulletin, back when we had bulletins, in the bulletin at the church at Bonavista Baptist was an advertisement for residential dean of Carey Theological College. Now, I had heard of Carey Theological College, but I really didn't know a lot about them. And So, but as I read this, it said it would be ideal for a seminary student couple. It would be important that a person had experience doing maintenance work, which is always an important thing in ministry as well. And it would also be important that the person would have had experience working with college-age students in a residential setting. Well, during the time of working for McDonald's and doing my undergrad degree, Bonnie and I did weekend supervision at BLTS over 4 years, where we helped out the residential deans there by covering for them on the weekends. I worked with a guy named Don Turnbull each summer, who was on staff, and somebody that John knows and others of you might. He was on staff at BLTS as the chef, but Don also did all the maintenance work at the school. And so what I found quite interesting is, as I was sat down and I read this, actually I could tell you nothing about the rest of the service, because this ad just jumped out at me, and I thought, really, is this it? Is this a possibility? And so the next few days were spent asking people, what is Carey Theological College? Help me to understand it. I've heard of Regent College as well. What is it? How do these two work together and such? And it came to be one of those situations that I don't recommend anybody does, where I put God on trial in a sense. And I said, okay, God, well, if this is truly of you, then there's 5 things that you're going to have to do. And like I said, I don't recommend this. 5, yeah, just five, you know, 5 things that you're going to need to do. So what you're going to need to do here, God, is this. You're going to have to get us the job as the residential deans at Carey Theological College. I'm going to have to finish my undergrad. I was doing 4 courses in spring session. And so I would have to finish those courses and formally graduate. I would have to be able to get enrolled in Regent College, which was the primary seminary there on the West Coast. I know that's not the word they would use, but for primary training place. I would have to make enough money over the summer in order to pay for the move, because Carey wasn't prepared to move or pay to move a student that far from Calgary to Vancouver. And then fifthly, we had purchased a house a couple of years earlier, and God, you'd have to sell the house as well. So that was just the 5 that I gave him. A couple of weeks later, Bonnie and I were invited to the Canadian Baptist of Western Canada. Were having their board meetings at BLTS. And Ken Bellows, who was the principal of BLTS at the time, invited Phil Collins, who was the president of Carey at the time, to have lunch. He invited Bonnie and I to come and have lunch with Phil. It turned out that was our job interview. We didn't realize it at the time, but we had lunch together, and that was our job interview. And about a week later, Phil Collins offered us the position of residential deans. By the end of June, I finished up my classes and made it through. So all of that was all right. Got a hold of Regent College, found out we were past the admissions date, but for a $25 fee, you could still apply, an extra $25 fee. So that didn't seem like it was all that difficult of an obstacle. A friend of mine who is a school teacher used to deliver milk during the Calgary Stampede every summer for about the 12 days or so that the Stampede was on, as a way of making a little extra money over the summer. He got me a job with the dairy that he was working with. And over the time of the Stampede, I made $1,200, which actually turned out to be pretty much exactly the number of dollars that we needed in order to make a move to Vancouver. And lastly was, we had a house to sell. And another longtime friend, somebody that John would know, was Bob Carmichael, who was our realtor at the time. Put our house up for sale. It was up there for 2 or 3 weeks. And then on a Friday, Bob called me and he said, well, I got good news and I've got bad news. So we said, well, what's that? He said, well, the good news is that somebody's putting in an offer on your home. The bad news is that it's conditional on the sale of their home. And their home is in Northeast Calgary. And nothing is moving in Northeast Calgary. So we said, well, okay, at least we could still accept other offers. We take that and we move forward. That was on the Friday. On Monday, Bob called me and he said, somebody wants you in Vancouver. And I said, what do you mean somebody wants me in Vancouver? He said, that person's house sold over the weekend. And there's no other explanation other than divine intervention as to why that house sold. And that's the part that always gets me whenever I tell this story, is that in many ways, you know, I kind of threw up these tests, right? These obstacles, and you think, all right, God, if you can really do it. And so we go from late May, on a Wednesday night, late May 1992, when Bonnie and I decided, yes, pastoral ministry was right, but we created a plan, to August 1st, 1992, when we moved into the residence at Carey Theological College in order to become the residential deans. And then early in September, I started my studies to do a Master of Divinity at Regina College. And to me, that became my call story. And God knew I needed a story. And I think what was interesting as well is that when I got to Regent and you started to visit with other people, you realized they all had a story. God had been working in people's lives, and he guides and he directs and he leads through all these different things. And to me, whenever I have a challenging time, or I wrestle with, am I really doing what I'm supposed to be doing? I go back to that call story. And I'm affirmed by it. And I'm grateful for it. So we spent 3 years in Vancouver, having to live out on the very west coast of Vancouver on the UBC campus, and finished my Master of Divinity, and then accepted a call to Weyburn, Saskatchewan. And I know you'll find this hard to believe, but there was a lot of people in Vancouver who kept saying, why in the world would you be going to Weyburn, Saskatchewan? But you know what? We went to Weyburn and we had 5 fantastic years there. It was a great first church experience. The person who was serving as an interim pastor there before we arrived, I met with him once when I was out prior to our move. And he said to me, you know, Rob, this church is just looking for a family to love. And man, that's what we found in Weyburn. People there loved us. And we loved the experience that we had there. And I learned so much. And they let me try so many different things. And I look back on the time that we had in Weyburn fondly, mindful of the many lessons that we learned there, and the many relationships with people that we still have from there as well, and that we're grateful for. And for our kids, the honorary grandparents that they have, people that they still till to this day call grandpa and grandma, and which is kind of cool to be able to have that photo. I'll keep this. I don't know. Am I out of time, John? Do I have 5 more minutes? Or no, I'm okay. All right. I didn't look to see when I started, and then I just get going. That's the problem with preachers, right? They just get going. But excuse me. So after 5 years, we left Weyburn and actually accepted a call back to the coast to a church that had only been in existence for about 10 years. It was a relatively small church plant that was there. And we ended up being there in Coquitlam, a suburb of Vancouver, for the next 8 years, where I pastored that particular congregation. And that's where our kids were, spent much of their formative years there and grew up in that area. It was a challenging ministry. In the very first, I guess I look back and I think how grateful and warmly we were embraced in Weyburn. It's not that we weren't embraced warmly in Coquitlam, but it was a completely different scenario. And in the first 6 months, I had 3 different suicide attempts that I walked with people through. I had 2 different couples whose marriage broke up, and I found myself in the middle of. I had, and then to the other extreme, I had an individual a couple come to me one day and they said, now this was 2000. For some of you that might recall dates, there was a tech bubble in early 2000 and it crashed in the summertime. And this one couple came to me late September in 2000, and the guy said, you know, in my company where I'm an engineer, we've been given stock options. And just before the summer began, I decided to cash in my stock options. And he said, I now have $3.5 million that I don't know what to do with. Do you have any advice for me? And ironically, this church plant didn't have a church building. We were meeting in a school. So one of the first things out of my mouth was, well, obviously, you know, we don't have a church building. We could certainly see something work towards that. And their immediate response was, oh no, we wouldn't see that as a priority. And so as again, still a relatively young pastor who's learning, you kind of get thrown back. And the number of challenging situations that I went through in that ministry, I believe, helped to equip me to become a regional minister. And after 8 years, in that role, I accepted a position as the regional minister for BC and the Yukon. And so the other nice part was my family was still able to stay. We were still able to stay in that same general area. My kids didn't end up having to be moved a whole lot in our ministry time. But I moved into a new role. And when you're a regional minister, the BCY anyway has 60 churches that are a part of it. And so as a regional minister, it's not your job to run those churches, but it is your role to support the pastors and the leadership of 60 churches and help them walk through the many different situations that they go through. And you hope, the ideal really is that for any church in a region, if they have a challenge or a problem or a situation that arises, one of the things we keep talking about at the denominational staff level is that we want churches to feel like they always have somebody that they know they can call, and that's the denominational office. And it might be that the denominational office doesn't have the exact answer that you need at that moment, but hopefully they can find somebody else that will help you. And because the number of scenarios are beyond our imagination as to the types of things that come up in church life. Many of you are very, very aware of that type of thing. So for 9 years I spent as the regional minister, which meant a fair bit of travel and a lot of connecting with churches all over BC. Well, what a unique privilege to be able to walk with churches in that way. And then from there, I became the executive minister just about 4 years ago now. And so that means that I get to work with the regional ministers and several other of our executive staff team. And I also work with our ministry partners across Canada and around the world. I have responsibility for the finances, the responsibility for visioning and working directly with the board. And that's the role that I've been in for the last 4 years. And we'll see. It's a 5-year term, and I have 1 more year. So we'll see what they do with me after that. John, can I tell one more quick story? Yep. Okay. What I forgot to tell you about at Weyburn is that when we were brought in for, you know how a pastor will come in and spend a weekend maybe for a call, and you get to know them. In Weyburn, Saskatchewan, I was sitting in the church building, and this man from the congregation came up beside me. He wasn't a member of the search committee, but his wife was. And he sat beside me and we started talking. And as we started talking, he says to me, you know, you're here because you work for McDonald's. And I was kind of taken aback. And I thought, what do you mean, you know, I'm here because I work for McDonald's? And the thing is that Weyburn didn't want a brand new grad, somebody straight out of seminary. They wanted somebody who had some life experience as well. And so for him and for that church, it was very important that I had worked for McDonald's, in a sense, that I had some life experience that went beyond just the schooling experience. Fast forward to regional minister days. One of the reasons why Jeremy Bell, who was then the executive minister, contacted me was because not only did I have ministry experience, but I also had business experience. And he thought that that might be an asset for somebody who is a regional minister. And now as an executive minister, when I'm dealing with a budget that's actually very similar to the one that I last dealt with overall dollar-wise in the last McDonald's restaurant program, I keep going back to the fact that McDonald's played a very important foundational role to the ministries that I've been called to. That's not everybody's story. Each of us have our own stories, but that's a very important foundational piece to where I've been called to. My life verse is Joshua 1, chapter 9, or Joshua chapter 1, verse 9. Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous, do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And I take that verse as a verse of hope and a verse of promise and assurance that no matter what situation that I find myself in, that God goes with me. And I know that that's a verse that each of you can hold on to as well, that the Lord your God will go with you wherever you go, whatever the battles are that you're facing, whatever the challenges are that lie before you, that he goes with us. So thank you for the time. I'm sure I've run up against the clock by now, John.
I mentioned to you, you had 30 minutes, and it's 30 minutes and 30 seconds. You did very well, very well.
I must have had a good teacher back in Bible school.
Yes, Jerry Fisher was very good. Oh, thank you so much. And after hearing about the 5 obstacles, if you put 5 obstacles up before God, before accepting our invitation, we praise the Lord that he answered those 5 obstacles so that you were able to accept our invitation. Hearing some of the names that you mentioned brings back some wonderful memories. Don Turnbull, worked with him for many years at BL. Ken Bellows, of course. Ken was the senior pastor at Weyburn for a number of years and then became executive minister of Ontario Quebec Convention, is now in Edmonton. He's also the brother of Irene Satropa here in the city. When you mention Weyburn, I think of Mavis Goranson and how wonderful family she was and how supportive she has been to our province, our denomination. And when you mentioned Bob Carmichael, I knew Bob and Marg Carmichael when I was music minister at Bonavista Baptist Church. And when we accepted the call to come to Regina, we couldn't sell our house. And Bob was our real estate agent. And he said, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. And almost a year after we moved here, he did take care of it. The people who were renting it didn't know that we wanted to sell it, and they were interested, and he took care of all of those things. So wonderful, wonderful memories. And Dr. Phil Collins, when I was going through ordination, Phil was a dear friend and encouraged me on that path. So thank you so very much for, as I said earlier, taking time out of your busy schedule. Very challenging path for our denomination and other denominations right now. And you are the right person at the right time, and we wish the very best for you and for your much better half, Bonnie. So thank you again, Rob, and thank you one and all. Our speaker for April is going to be special, a very special speaker. Not that all our speakers aren't, but this one's going to be extra special because I have gone through about 5 or 6 people and have not been able to find anyone at this point. And but I'm waiting for confirmation. And I didn't put up 5 obstacles. I'm just asking for a speaker. And so hopefully I will hear positive reports. And once I hear, I will send out an email to all of you that are on the achievers list and let you know who it is. Our April 22nd luncheon will be the last one for this year. And so hopefully we will all look forward to our time together then. Any questions any of you might have before we sign off? My stomach is growling. I've watched some of you eating and drinking, and I had this McDonald's pamphlet in front of me to my left and would sneak a look at it every once in a while, and that didn't help.
Yeah.
Did you want to say something? I see your hand, Marilyn.
Yeah, I just want to ask Rob, how can we pray for you and your family and your ministry specifically at this moment in time?
Oh, that's very kind. Thanks, Marilyn. Well, family-wise, we just had our second grandchild 2.5 weeks ago. She's just 2.5 weeks old. So it's pretty exciting for us. I just said the other day, I posted a picture of the 8 of us on our Facebook page now. Bonnie and I, you look back, right? And you look back on when you started as a couple, and we had 2 children, and then they each got married, and now they each have a child. So we're pretty excited to be grandparents, and that's why we moved from Vancouver to Calgary, so that we could be closer to our kids and our grandchildren. And that was the primary. And the other nice part of that is that because the denominational office, the main administrative office, is here in Calgary, I was given the flexibility to make that move as well. So that worked out great for us. I think, denominationally, John just alluded to it, we're in a challenging time right now. As we wrestle, there's 2 key questions that I keep coming back to, and not to get into it too deeply with you, but the 2 key questions I keep coming back to is that we as a denomination, and when I say that, I mean the churches. What has to happen is that we have to have an opportunity to come together, and the churches to decide. As a regional or as an executive minister, I truly believe my role is not to set the agenda for the CBWC. My role is to support the agenda that is driven by the churches at the assembly. The churches have to make the decision as to where it is we're going and how we're doing it. And then my role and the role of the rest of my staff is to be able to help in that, and we support in that. Other denominations work differently. They have a top-down hierarchy, and somebody up here will tell them what to do, and that's not how it works in our Baptist tradition. So the 2 key questions are, who makes decisions about local church membership? And then what does it mean to be a member church of the CBWC? The 2 key areas are the autonomy of the local church and the interdependence of all of our churches that work together. There's 165 different churches in the CBWC. And some people would argue quite vehemently that every individual church should be able to discern its own direction and path, and it really shouldn't matter what the larger group feels. And others would argue the other, that each church should have a certain degree of autonomy, but there is a responsibility that comes with being a part of a larger body as well, and that there has to be some common ground there. And so that's what we're wrestling with, I'd say, in many, many ways, is helping us to find that common ground. And so my prayer is for an understanding in that, and for a unity in that, that we could actually come together with it. But it's a very unique, I don't know if it is much more unique than in other times, but the conversations around human sexuality are the ones that have become the most divisive for us, and that's a major challenging piece. So that might be more than what you were looking for, but I appreciate the question. Thank you, Marilyn.
Any other questions? Feel free.
I just want to say in a few words, I've been a member of First Baptist Church now for over 50 years.
Mm.
And I've seen not only the church, but the whole denomination change in very healthy ways. And just theologically, I think we're on such good ground now.
Mm.
And I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you, Annabelle. Appreciate that. Let's see. Yeah. And if I may, John, I'd just like to take a second to say thank you to you. You have been serving in your role at First Baptist for 150 years. And you have, and it's been an important role. And I know this, and I know not everybody likes the word retirement. People use all different words. But as your formal ministry at First Baptist will come to an end a little bit later this year, I just want to thank you publicly, in this group at least anyway, for the role that you have played, not just at First Baptist, but also with BLTS, and that influence has gone far and wide across this denomination. So thank you for that. And just, I do pray for God's blessing for you and Deb and your family as well, as to what's next, and how God will continue to use you, and in particular your musical gifts. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Any other questions that you want to ask Rob? Surely there's some very challenging, theological, deep question that you want to ask him.
That's when I'll turn it over to Joel.
Well, again, thank you so very much for sharing your time with us. And we thank all of you. And as I said, I will let you know who our speaker is for April as soon as it is possible. But until then, be safe and stay well. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rob. My sister-in-law says hi to you.
Ah, very nice. Tell her I said hi back. Thank you, everyone. It was nice to see you all here today.
Thank you, Rob.
And thanks, Kevin, very much for being the Zoom host. Bye, everyone.